have never been understood for who I am. My life is like a colorful puzzle piece, where you may not be able to see the full puzzle, but you can invariably see the image that is going to create. Unlike many of my peers, I was never able to enjoy a typical childhood, for I had to endure challenges that frankly a child should not have to go through. For those with developmental difficulty, developmental challenges, their society or others may often look at them as either weird, ill, or retarded, and oftentimes they may not get the help that they need. This is a pain that I understand very clearly as someone who is on the autism spectrum. As someone who is an autistic, I've had to deal with the stigma and the difficulties that is associated with being an autistic. These challenges were not brought upon me by virtue of my birth, or by virtue of when that I was diagnosed, but rather by a world that views autistics as people that need to be cured of a disease that must be eradicated. Before I can even continue to talk about my own stories about autism, I have to set the stage clear for what autism even is, for it is a disease that there are so many misconceptions and that the public understanding may not be very clear. The World Health Organization defines autism as the following: a diverse group of conditions characterized by some degree of difficulty with social interaction and communication. Other characteristics include atypical patterns, such as difficulty between transitioning through one subject or another. The CDC defines autism as a developmental disability caused by differences in the brain, and that those with autism may behave, communicate, and interact differently from ways that many other people do. However, the UK NHS gives this following statement on their website: being autistic does not mean you have an illness or disease. It means your brain works in a different way from other people. You can even see that even at the highest echelons of public health, there is still a disagreement on what autism is. However, what all three of these institutions agree on is that those with autism have difficulty communicating, and that is primarily due to the differences in the way how the autistic brain is wired. It is due to that I and many other autistics have had trouble communicating with other humans. I must note, however, that since the discovery of autism in the early 20th century, the way how we have understood autism has changed dramatically over time. Initially, we had believed that autism was a form of childhood schizophrenia. However, that turned out to be absolutely false. We didn't even declare autism to be a spectrum until 1994, upon the publication of DSM-4. But back then, autism was still classified as being five different disorders. It was only in 2013, with the publication of DSM-5, when our modern understanding of autism had actually arrived. It is due to the difficulty of the scientific community to understand what autism even is. It makes it even harder to communicate to the public and to society in general the real truth about autism. And this is the source of all the misinformation about autism today. The general public, there are two views of autism that persist. The first one is that of a person who will consistently make tantrums all the time, and they're not able to control themselves or to control any of their impulses, and they simply can't, and they're unable to communicate with their peers or any other person around them. Now, the other side of that, the other extrema, is that of someone with incredible intellectual talent, which is someone who is able to memorize any subject that they absolutely love, like the Rain Man, or be able to make incredible scientific discoveries that last a decade. For me and the vast majority of autistics, those two extremas do not fit at all. And that view of autism could not differ further from the truth. For autism in reality is a really large spectrum, which means that the autism that one person will have will differ from another. And that means that the treatments that one will receive will certainly differ from another. However, that does not always mean that the treatments that an autistic patient will receive will always be for their benefit. For historically, the treatments that have been administered to autistic patients have often been to cover up the autistic traits instead of taking advantage of the potential advantages of being an autistic. For a long time, I and many other autistics have been forced to put on a mask, and been forced to conceal a piece of our identity. But eventually, I decided to break it. Until I came to the US in 2012, no one even knew I had autism. It was only in the middle of first grade that it was even discovered. At the time, it was considered to be Asperger's syndrome, which is a form of autism where you may have difficulty communicating, but you may have more intellectual capacities. At that time, my parents were concerned that I would have difficulty socializing with my peers, and that it would be difficult for me to look eye to eye with others. There was one, I remember in particular, this one video that I was showed one time on the way home, where I was shown a video of an autistic girl with her quote unquote weird behaviors, especially since she was looking very awkward to get the camera, and she had difficulty speaking. Right after, I was told that Bill Gates, at the time the richest man in the world, had autism. However, the impression that it left on me had frankly left me confused. But I had overall believed that I would forever be a weird kid that would always struggle to understand autism. My parents, they're very much loving people, but they frankly have not always understood what autism is. However, there was one person in my family who understood autism more than the average person. That person to me was Anton, who was my aunt. She had been a nurse practitioner for a long time, and she was far more familiar with treating patients with those such as ASD and ADHD and those other conditions. Initially, the way how she had begun to converse to me was through two media. The first one was through food, which frankly I'd always enjoyed, and the second one was through literature. Frankly, I didn't always read the books I was told to read. However, as time had progressed, my abilities to listen and to speak had gradually improved, and eventually it had become more and more clear as I had become a speaker. We would oftentimes hang out, whether it be by ourselves, with my cousins, or be it in a larger family setting. But those small individual experiences had eventually added up to make an experience that would eventually make me an improved public speaker, and has allowed me to express myself and eventually become the person that I am today. There were two things that Anton had always had left an impression on me, where she was always, where there were two key values that she had taught me that have resonated with me throughout this day, through now actually. The first was through the embracing of experiences, and that second one was that constant curiosity. It is that curiosity that has fueled me ever since, and it has also helped me embrace that first portion, which was to allow for new experiences. She was always someone that was willing to push my boundaries and see where I really could be. It is frankly highlighted in one summer, the summer of 2018. It was that summer where she had really challenged me. There were two books of American literature that I remember that were particularly challenging for me. It's To Kill a Mockingbird and For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway. Those two books, they were a real challenge for me, but she had thought that I had the capacity to read those books. I did read those books, but frankly, the questions that she had asked were very difficult. They were difficult for me to answer, but she had helped guide me to answer them. And with those several individual hangouts that we had had over that summer, she had said to me time and time again that my ability to speak had improved significantly since I was a kid. I come from a kid who would often have a hard time looking people in the eye when they spoke, to now being the person who is able to look someone in the eye very clearly and be able to be in conversation for longer periods of time. That summer was a very great summer. However, things would not be so rosy forever. After a 9-year battle with breast cancer, unfortunately, we had lost her. The moment that I'd known that I'd lost her was the most devastating moment of my life. That moment, the pain from those very dark moments still had lingered on really deeply in me, and it pains to speak. For me, it's even hard for me to speak about it now, because losing such a close friend, mentor, and family member at such a young age is something that a teenager, especially a 13-year-old, would never expect to endure. And this was a tragedy that had frankly really broken me on the inside. But I'd known internally that there was something that I feel like an important lesson was taught in me. I believed that by the time that Anton had moved on, that I felt that I'd been given the strength and the wisdom to overcome the single biggest challenge of my life. And that was being the challenges of being an autistic. In 2019, it was the end of spring and summer was about to come. And it turned out that another summer would once again be very important for my life. That summer turned out to be an epiphany, or some sort of nirvana. And over that, that nirvana did not occur over the course of a day or a week. It had occurred over a gradual period of time. It was at that point where I'd learned that many of the most successful artists, scientists, as well as many other entrepreneurs, that is when I discovered that they were all on the spectrum, and it had begun to knock down the thinking in my mind that autism was a disease that would forever make you difficult, that would ensure that you would never be a successful person. But it turned out that it had begun to reveal in my mind that it could be a condition, that it could be a key asset, depending on how you use it. However, the key turning point came when I'd begun to read several articles written by autistics and by researchers arguing that autism is not a disease, but instead is a condition. From that point onward, I had grown to realize that autism is not a disease that you are given and that you must be cured of completely. It is a condition that you are born with, that you have for your whole life, but it is something that depending on how you look at it, could potentially become your single greatest asset. Which brings me to the point of neurodiversity. Those with autism and those with other conditions such as ADHD, we have a different set of challenges compared to that of the general populace. We have a different set of skills and a different set of strengths that could potentially, if harnessed correctly, could make us into very productive and successful human beings. And this has led me to the conclusion that we must not only accept a diversity in backgrounds, but also a diversity with minds. Because if we can look beyond the initial appearances of a person, whether it be through their background or whether what label that they've been attached. We can come together as a society, and that we can improve, and that once we are willing to accommodate the challenges that we face, we can take advantage of each other's mutual strengths so that we can build a better humanity for the future. And I would like to say to my parents, thank you so much for being such wonderful mentors. And to Anton, wherever you are in the world, thank you so much for being the greatest teacher of my life. Thank you so much. Good night. Bye-bye.